An older, sexy Black American lady named Chanel is working in Korea, and she's about to get the ride of her life from her younger secret mafia boss, Toji Lee. Toji Lee plans an impromptu business trip to a mountain getaway, and his MD, Chanel Nicole, is to join along with few other Korean females. This trip, unknown to Chanel, is set up by her boss so he can find his way to her heart. Does he succeed in this game, or does she get irritated and run from him? Watch till the end to find out. Please share and subscribe to MYYOUTUBE channel if you want more hot age gap stories. Where are you watching from? So, if we pivot the Q3 campaign to this digital-first, influencer-led model, we capture the 1825 demographic without alienating our core luxury buyers. The analytics are unequivocal. Chanel Nicole's voice, a smooth contralto with the faintest ghost of a Georgia draws, filled the sleek boardroom. She gestured with a manicured hand toward the glowing screen behind her, where graphs and metrics painted a story of calculated success. At 42, she was the masterpiece in the room, her rich brown skin glowing against the emerald silk of her tailored dress, her posture a rod of pure, unshakable professionalism. The junior associates, Myra, Sarah, and Kiwon, sat in a perfumed row, their nods synchronized, their expressions masks of polite attention. Chanel felt their eyes like subtle pinpricks. The respectful MD, the capable Ajima, the American. The whisper, sharp as a splinter, came from Myra. It wasn't directed at the presentation. All eyes, including Chanel, flicked to the door at the back of the room. He entered without sound, a shadow given form in a $5,000 black suit. Toji Lee. 28 years old and heir to everything in sight, including the chair currently occupied by his ailing, rarely seen father. He moved with a predator's idle grace, all contained power and lethal economy. He didn't take a seat. He simply leaned against the far wall, arms crossed over his broad chest, his dark, impossible eyes scanning the room before landing, with the weight of a physical touch on Chanel. The air thickened. Sarah sat up straighter, a hand fluttering to her hair. Kiwon's smile became fixed and glittering. Chanel forced her lungs to expand. As I was saying, the integration requires. It requires guts. His voice was a low baritone, like stone rolling over gravel. It cut through her sentence, not with rudeness, but with absolute authority, which this division has lacked. His gaze never left hers. A challenge, an appraisal. Proceed. Then he was gone, pushing off the wall and disappearing as silently as he'd come, leaving a vacuum of silence in his wake. Chanel finished the presentation on autopilot, the words flowing from some deep professional reservoir even as her mind reeled. Guts. He looked right at her when he'd said it. This is a commanding view. It suits you. Chanel turned from the glass barrier of the rooftop terrace, the sole skyline a breathtaking tapestry of glittering steel and ambition behind her. Toji stood there, holding 2 tumblers of bourbon. He extended one. How did he know? The report will be on the server by 5 VP Lee, she said, taking the heavy crystal, careful to avoid the brush of his fingers. Toji, he corrected, taking a slow sip, his eyes never leaving her face. I can't call you by your first name. I have to be respectful, Chanel answered. I insist, call me Toji, and I didn't come for the report. We're having a retreat, team building, at the Sierra Resort in the mountains, all key personnel, mandatory. A retreat, the word felt absurd in her mouth. My Q4 planning cycle is preempted. He dismissed a quarter of her year with a blink. Pack for 3 days, it will be filled with cold nights and surprises. He let the last word hang, watching her over the rim of his glass. Surprises. It felt less like an itinerary note and more like a promise, or a threat. The junior team, Chanel said, grasping for solid ground. They'll see it as a vacation. Let them. He finished his drink, set the empty glass down with a definitive clink. I'm interested in what you see it as, Chanel SSI. The use of her first name, paired with the formal honorific, was a deliberate contradiction. Intimate and distant all at once, it coiled in her stomach. Don't be late, he said, already walking away. The bus leaves at 7, sharp. The Ciro resort lobby was a cathedral of rustic luxury, exposed pine beams, the scent of wood smoke and pine, heated floors underfoot. The junior team had already transformed it into a runway, a whirlwind of designer puffers and eager chatter. MD Nicole, you look very cozy, Kiwon said, her English sweet and sharp as a razor blade. Chanel merely nodded, rolling her sleek carry-on past them. Oh, MD Nim, there's a huge problem. Myra's face was a perfect portrait of distressed concern. Chanel's internal alarm sounded. What kind of problem, Myra? The booking, it is a total mess. The girls' dormitory suite only has 3 proper beds. It's really just for the 3 of us. Sarah and Kiwon nodded in unison, a chorus of manufactured sympathy. So awkward, Sarah sighed. But the executive suite is available, it's huge. Of course, it's just one suite. As if summoned by the script, Toji appeared from behind a vast stone column. In his hand, a single platinum keycard caught the light. A ghost of a smile played on his lips. Problem solved, he said, his voice cutting through the lobby's murmur. You're with me, Chanel SSI. You are more than welcome to share my room with me. The air vanished from the room. 3 pairs of eyes widened, jealousy calcifying into something harder, colder. This was no accident. This was design. VP Lee, surely there's another room. I can speak to the manager, Chanel began, her voice tight. I've already spoken to the manager. He closed the distance, his presence overwhelming. His voice dropped for her alone. This is the arrangement, unless you're afraid of a little proximity. The challenge was naked in his eyes. Go on, show me you're scared. Every instinct honed over 20 years of corporate battles and a freshly failed marriage straightened her spine. She would not be intimidated by a boy with a portfolio and a smirk. Lead the way, VP Lee. They walked down a silent, cedar-paneled corridor, the only sound the tap of her boots and the whisper of his wool trousers. He stopped at a heavy oak door, swiped the card. The lock released with a soft thunk. He pushed it open, but then filled the doorway, turning to block her entry. He leaned in, his gaze a physical sweep from the tips of her knee-high boots, up over the curve of her hips in the dark jeans, the soft drape of the cashmere over her breasts, to finally settle on her face. His expression was one of pure, audacious appraisal. You know, he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in the space between them. For a woman who just spent 4 hours on a bus, you're looking really hot. The words were a deliberate grenade, crude and meant to shatter her composure. Heat, part fury, part something else she refused to name, flooded her cheeks. She didn't retreat. Instead, she took a half step forward, closing the distance he had weaponized, until she could see the flecks of gold in his dark irises. Her voice, when it came, was a winter frost, a warning woven into every syllable. Let's get something clear, Toji. She saw a flicker in his eyes at her use of his name, bare of any title. I may have the face of a 20-year-old, she continued, her gaze unblinking, but I am not a small child you can startle with a firecracker. I am your MD. I built the division you just praised for its guts, so you can save the spoiled air act for your fan club back in the lobby. Silence, profound and complete. His smirk vanished, wiped clean by her words. For a long moment he just looked at her, and she saw the arrogant boy recede, replaced by something far more unsettling. A man, sharp, calculating, and intensely, dangerously focused. Then slowly a real smile touched his lips. It wasn't the cocky grin from before. This was thinner, sharper, a blade being drawn from its sheath. It held appreciation, surprise, and a spark of pure, unadulterated interest. Finally, he breathed, the word almost lost in the quiet hall. Someone who talks back. He stepped aside, a courtly gesture that felt like a victory and a surrender all at once. The suite beyond was a panorama of luxury, a vast living area, a fireplace, a single doorway leading to a shadowed bedroom. Chanel walked past him, her head high, the scent of sandalwood and cold night air clinging to him as she passed. The door clicked shut behind them, sealing them in. Her heart hammered a fierce, defiant rhythm against her ribs. The retreat had begun, and she had just realized with a jolt of thrilling, terrifying clarity that the real work trip was here in this room with him. The rules, whatever they were, had just been rewritten. Inside the room, Chanel was clearly setting boundaries with Toji. Chanel was so uncomfortable, refusing to sleep on the bed. Toji noticed this. "What a funny lady," he laughed. "What are you laughing at?" Chanel asked. "The couch is clearly mine. Don't worry, MD Kang, I have no designs on your sleep yet." The words, laced with a casual arrogance, hung in the air of the sprawling suite. Toji tossed his leather duffel onto the deep, charcoal-gray sofa with a definitive thud, claiming it. Chanel stood just inside the doorway, her suitcase a small island of her own reality in the middle of his. The space was a study in minimalist opulence. Vaulted ceilings of exposed pine, a wall of glass overlooking the jagged, moonlit peaks, a stone fireplace big enough to stand in, and one wide, arched doorway that led to a single, shadowed bedroom dominated by a vast, low platform bed. "That's remarkably generous of you," Chanel said, her voice dry. She refused to be flustered. She wheeled her bag past him, its wheels a loud protest on the polished concrete floor, and straight into the bedroom. "Make yourself at home," he called after her, a faint thread of amusement in his voice. The bedroom was all muted earth tones and soft, indirect lighting. The bed was a continent. She placed her bag deliberately on the far left side, a territorial marker. From the main room, she heard the clink of glass, the soft hiss of a cap being twisted off. Bourbon again. The next day, the team was at a restaurant eating. "You must try the hanwoo steak, vpnim. It's the specialty here." Myra's voice was a high, tinkling bell in the private dining room. She leaned so far over the table to serve Toji a piece of meat from the sizzling platter that Chanel feared for the structural integrity of her sweater. "Thank you, Mira SSI," Toji said, his tone polite, detached. He didn't look at her. The dinner was a performance. Sarah and Kiwon laughed at everything Toji said, which wasn't much. They refilled his wine glass before it was half empty. They spoke to each other in rapid, colloquial Korean, a linguistic wall that perfectly excluded Chanel, the American MD who only understood the professional dialect. Their glances at her were brief, polite, and utterly dismissive. She was the chaperone, the authority figure, the ajumma in the room, not a woman. "The market penetration strategy for Busan is quite fascinating, isn't it, MD-nim?" Kiwon suddenly asked in English, a false, bright curiosity in her eyes. Chanel took a slow sip of water. "It is, though the fascinating part is how the local demographics were misinterpreted in the initial report. I've noted the corrections." A brief silence. Toji's lips twitched. He raised his wine glass slightly in her direction, a silent toast to the kill. The junior women's smiles tightened. The suite was dark when she returned, lit only by the faint glow of the moon on snow through the vast windows. A single lamp was on by the couch, where Toji's blanket was neatly folded. He was absent. The silence was a relief, but it buzzed. She found herself on the suite's private deck, the cold mountain air needling through her sweater. She breathed in deep, the scent of pine and frozen earth clearing the cloying perfume and tension from the dinner. The stars were a dizzying, icy spray. Couldn't sleep either. She didn't jump. She'd almost sensed him coming. He stood in the doorway, silhouetted, holding 2 glasses. He stepped out, handed her one. The bourbon was already in it. "I was enjoying the quiet," she said, not taking it immediately. "Take it. You survived their mating ritual. You deserve a medal, or at least a decent drink." She took the glass, their fingers brushing. A spark of cold, then warmth. "It's not a ritual. It's a strategy," she said, taking a sip. The liquor burned a welcome path down her throat. "A tedious one." He leaned on the railing beside her, close but not touching. "All that energy, all that performance for what? A glance, a compliment." He turned his head, and in the moonlight his profile was sharp, almost severe. "You are the only one here not performing for me, Chanel SSI. It's refreshing." The use of her name again. The mountain air felt suddenly thinner. "I'm here to work, VP Lee." "Toji," he corrected softly. And we both know that's only half true tonight. He knocked back the rest of his drink. Good night. He left her there on the deck, the ghost of his words and the heat of the bourbon warring with the cold. Back inside, the suite felt different. His presence lingered. She moved to the bedroom, ready to bury herself in the oversized bed, and stopped. On her pillow, laid out with deliberate care, was a kimono-style robe, not the standard hotel issue. This was heavy silk the color of a deep forest, embroidered with subtle silver thread that formed intricate patterns of waves and clouds. It was breathtaking. It was an invasion. There was no note. From behind the closed door of the bathroom, she heard the shower start, and then under the rush of water, another sound. His voice. Low, tense, speaking not in Korean but in swift, staccato Mandarin. She caught only tones, not words, but the timbre was unmistakable, not the bored air, not the teasing boss. This was cold, hard authority, a threat issued quietly into steam. She quickly changed into her own sensible pajamas, the silk robe left untouched on the pillow, a seductive serpent in her bed. She turned off the light and lay rigid in the dark, listening. The shower stopped. Silence. Then the bathroom door opened, a slice of light cutting across the floor, then gone. She heard the soft pad of bare feet on concrete, the rustle of fabric as he settled on the couch, the sigh of leather. She must have drifted off because a sound jolted her awake. The soft snick of the suite door opening, then closing. She checked the clock on her phone, 3:17 a.m. She lay still, listening to the absolute quiet. An hour later, the door opened and closed again just as quietly. Soft footsteps passed her bedroom doorway. A faint, metallic scent caught her nose, cold night air and something else, something coppery. From the living room, she heard the quiet clink of a glass, the splash of liquid. Then silence. Chanel stared into the dark, the silk robe a dark pool on the pillow beside her. The mountain retreat was no longer just about corporate games or jealous juniors. The man on her couch had another life, one that kept hours with the moon and carried the smell of winter and danger back into their shared space. The territory of the suite had just been redrawn, and it was full of shadows. The next day, a soft knock at the bedroom door jolted Chanel awake. Dawn light, pale and silvery, bled through the cracks in the wooden blinds. Coffee's ready. Toji's voice, morning rough, was followed by the retreating sound of his footsteps. She emerged 10 minutes later, dressed in cream-colored trousers and a soft sweater, her hair pulled into a loose knot. He stood by the espresso machine, its gentle hiss the only sound. He was already dressed in dark, tailored trousers and a simple gray Henley that stretched across his shoulders. He handed her a ceramic cup without a word. She took it. The espresso was perfect, rich and bitter just the way she took it. No sugar, no milk. "How did you know?" she asked, the steam warming her face. He leaned back against the counter, his own cup in hand, his gaze a lazy sweep over her. "I pay attention, MD Kang. It's black, like your presentation style, uncompromising." He turned to the small dining table, where a covered silver tray sat beside a single, creamy envelope. "Breakfast. You ordered room service." "I arranged it." He lifted the cover. A perfect French omelet, a tiny salad, fresh fruit, a croissant so flaky it seemed to hover above the plate. It was her exact ideal breakfast, things she'd never mentioned here. He must have dug through corporate files, maybe even asked her old assistant. The scale of the intrusion should have angered her. Instead, a treacherous warmth spread in her chest. "And this," he said, picking up the envelope and holding it out. Her name was written on the front in a bold, slashing script. She stared at it. "What is it?" "Read it." She set her coffee down, took the envelope. The paper was thick, expensive. She slid out a single sheet. "Chanel, the mountain air does not know what to do with you. It is used to whispering through pines, to carrying the cries of hawks. It is not used to the quiet storm of a woman who contains multitudes. It flutters around you, confused. I understand its dilemma. You ask for no praise, so I will not offer it. I will only state facts I have observed. You stir your tea precisely 3 times, counterclockwise. You hum a single, unresolved bar of something bluesy when you think you are alone. You have the most expressive mouth I have ever seen. It is a masterpiece of contradiction, full and severe, soft and stubborn. It tells the truth even when your words are diplomatic. Last night, during Myra's performance, your lips pressed into a line so sharp it could have cut glass. This morning, as you sleep, they are parted, softer than anything in this hard landscape. I find myself cataloging its shapes. It is a distracting and thoroughly enjoyable pursuit. Do not mistake this for a game. I do not play. I observe. I acquire. I appreciate fine art. Yours. T. She read it twice. The air left the room. Her face felt hot. She looked up at him. He was watching her, his expression unreadable. This is inappropriate, she managed, her voice thin. Bosses don't send their staff these kinds of letters. Is it? He took a slow sip of coffee. It's merely observation. Are my facts wrong? The part about my mouth is not a fact. It's a commentary. It's the most factual part of the letter, he said, his eyes dropping to her lips now, as if on cue. It's right there. Denying it would be like denying the mountain is outside the window. Pointless. She should crumble the letter. She should reprimand him. She did neither. She folded it carefully, her fingers trembling slightly, and slipped it back into the envelope. You shouldn't have written this. I wanted to. He set his cup down and moved closer, not touching her, but the space between them became charged, dense. And I wanted you to know I wanted to. There's a difference. She tilted her head up to maintain eye contact. And what do you want, Toji? Beyond cataloging my expressions. A slow smile touched his mouth. A conversation, a real one, without your title or mine hanging between us. We're sharing a room. Isn't that conversation enough? We're sharing space. That's geography, not conversation. He reached out, his hand hovering near her face, not touching. Your geography is compelling. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. You're my boss. For now, titles are temporary. This, his gaze swept over her again, feels less temporary. That's the arrogance of youth talking. Everything feels permanent at 28. Is that what you think this is? A youth whim. His smile faded, replaced by something more intense. I've been responsible for things since I was a teenager that would give your seasoned board members nightmares. I don't have whims, I have wants, and I pursue them with singular focus. And you want a conversation. I want to hear the story behind the 3 counterclockwise stirs. I want to know the name of that blues song you hum. I want to know what that mouth says when it isn't being diplomatic. She was drowning in the specificity of his attention. It was the most potent flattery she'd ever known, to be seen in minute, granular detail. It might say things you don't want to hear. I doubt that. His hand finally moved, the back of his knuckles brushing, featherlight, along her jawline. A jolt of pure electricity shot through her. I have a feeling I want to hear every single thing it has to say. She caught his wrist, not pushing it away, just holding it. His skin was warm, his pulse steady and strong under her fingertips. This is a very bad idea. The worst, he agreed, his voice dropping to a murmur. Catastrophic, professionally ruinous, potentially heartbreaking. You think you could break my heart? The question was out, braver than she felt. His eyes darkened. No, I think you could break mine, and that is the most terrifying and interesting thing about you. They stood there, frozen in the morning light, her hand on his wrist, his touch on her face, the letter a burning secret in her pocket. The espresso machine hissed again, a forgotten sigh. The team activity today was archery on a sheltered range. Toji, of course, was a natural, his form flawless, each arrow hitting the inner gold with a soft, mocking thwack. The junior women cheered each shot as if he'd won an Olympic gold. He finished his round and walked straight to Chanel, who was fumbling with the grip of her bow. You're thinking too much, he said, coming up behind her, not touching. It's instinct like this. He moved then, his body aligning behind hers, his arms coming around to adjust her grip on the bow. His chest was a solid wall against her back, his breath warm against her ear. Every nerve ending screamed. Myra's cheerful chatter died mid-sentence. Don't aim with your eyes, he murmured, his voice for her alone. Aim with your gut, feel the target, then let go. His hands covered hers, correcting her stance. The wood of the bow vibrated between them. She could smell his sandalwood soap, the clean scent of his skin. She was surrounded by him. Now, he whispered, his lips almost brushing her ear. She released. The arrow flew, a wild, wobbling line, and thudded into the outer white ring of the target. A terrible shot. But he didn't move away. He laughed, a soft, genuine sound that vibrated through her. Your gut is a rebel, I like it. He finally stepped back, and the cold mountain air rushed in to fill the space he'd occupied, leaving her chilled and aching. At the group dinner that night, the tension had a new flavor. The junior women were no longer just dismissive, they were watchful, wary. The dynamic had shifted, and they'd sensed it. A platter of sizzling bulgogi was passed around. As it came to Chanel, Sarah, sitting opposite, reached for the water pitcher at the same time. A clumsy, calculated collision. The pitcher tipped. Icy water cascaded directly into Chanel's lap, soaking through her thin wool trousers. A gasp. Egu, Mdinim, I'm so sorry, Sarah cried, her eyes wide with feigned horror. Before Chanel could even react, a shadow fell across the table. Toji was there. He didn't look at Sarah. He didn't say a word to her. His gaze, cold and sharp as a shard of obsidian, held the young woman frozen for one terrifying second. The message was clear, I see you, and this is your only warning. Then he turned to Chanel. Wordlessly, he shrugged out of his tailored navy blazer. He didn't hand it to her. He stepped behind her chair and draped it over her shoulders, his hands lingering for a moment, pulling the fabric closed at her collar. The weight of it was immense, warm from his body, enveloping her in his scent. Sandalwood, yes, but beneath it, that undeniable, dangerous spice. There, he said, his voice back to its casual, controlled tone. Better. He returned to his seat as if nothing had happened. The table was utterly silent. Chanel sat wrapped in his jacket, the heat of his body seeping into her chilled skin, the evidence of his protection, and his claim, impossible to ignore. Back in the suite, she stood in the bathroom, the blazer hanging on the back of the door. She changed into her pajamas. The silk robe from the night before still lay on her pillow, a silent question. She picked up her soaked trousers to rinse them in the sink. In the mirror, her reflection stared back, flushed, eyes too bright. She looked at the jacket. Then she did something reckless. She took it off the hook and brought it to her face, inhaling deeply. It was him, entirely him. It made her knees weak. The bathroom door opened. He stood there, having just come from the living room, dressed in sweatpants and nothing else. His torso was a landscape of lean muscle and pale skin, a few faint, silvery scars mapping a history she didn't know. He was doing a set of slow, controlled pull-ups on the doorframe of the bathroom, his body a study in tensile strength. He caught her watching, her face buried in his jacket. He didn't stop his motion. Up, down, each movement defined the chords in his arms, his back. See something you like, Chanel? He asked, his voice strained only from the effort. She didn't drop the jacket. She held his gaze in the mirror, her own voice surprisingly steady. I'm just appreciating the fabric, very high thread count. He dropped from the bar, landing softly. He took 2 steps into the bathroom, now standing close behind her reflection. His eyes met hers in the glass. Liar. He reached around her, not for her, but for his own toothbrush. His bare arm brushed against hers. The contact was a brand. The letter, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Was that the fabric or was that you? He paused, toothbrush in hand, his gaze burning into hers through the mirror. That, he said, low and sure, was the foundation. The rest is up to you. He began brushing his teeth, a shockingly mundane act in the midst of the electric storm between them. She stood there, holding his jacket, wearing his scent, the ghost of his words and the memory of his body against hers at the archery range seared into her skin. The line between professional ruin and personal awakening had not just blurred, it had been incinerated, and she was standing in the ashes, not wanting to leave. The sound woke her, not the quiet click of the door this time, but a muffled, pained grunt from the living room, then a soft curse. It was still dark, the digital clock reading 4:13 a.m. Chanel slipped out of bed, pulling on the silk robe over her pajamas. It felt like a secret armor. She padded to the bedroom doorway. The scene was lit by a single floor lamp. Toji stood by the sofa, his back to her, shirtless. He was dabbing at a fresh, angry-looking cut that sliced across the hard plane of his right shoulder blade with a cloth soaked in something from a small, unlabeled brown bottle. The muscle in his jaw was clenched tight against the sting. On the low table beside him, next to the bottle, lay a gun. A sleek, black, unmistakable pistol. Chanel's breath hitched. The sound was soft, but in the silent room it was a gunshot. He went utterly still, then slowly turned. His eyes, dark and unreadable, met hers. There was no surprise in them, only a weary acceptance. "You should be asleep," he said, his voice gravelly. She stepped into the room, the silk whispering around her legs. "You're hurt." "It's nothing." "And that," she nodded toward the table, her heart a frantic bird against her ribs. "Is that nothing, too?" He followed her gaze, then looked back at her. "That's a tool." "A tool for what, Toji? For the business that keeps you out until 3 a.m. smelling like a fight." Her voice was low, trembling with a cocktail of fear and fury. "Who are you?" He tossed the bloodied cloth onto the table, right beside the gun. "You know who I am." "I know the VP, the heir to Lee Enterprises. I don't know the man who comes back to his hotel's suite bleeding with a weapon on the coffee table." She crossed her arms, the stubborn set of her chin that he'd catalogued in his letter now fully present. "So, tell me, or I walk out of this suite right now and take the first car back to Seoul." A flicker of something, anger, maybe respect, crossed his face. "It's not a game, Chanel." "I never thought it was. But you're the one who wrote me a love letter about my mouth and then left to go do whatever this is." She gestured wildly at the cut, the gun. "So which is it? The romantic or the gangster? Or is this just another part of the performance for you?" He took a step toward her. She stood her ground. "There is no performance with you," he said, each word deliberate. "The letter was real. This," he gestured to his back, "is also real. They exist in the same world, my world." "A world of what? Midnight meetings and gunshots." "A world of loyalty and blood," he said, his voice dropping, stripping away the last pretense. "Of obligations that don't care about stock market hours. My father isn't just a CEO. He's the head of a family, a punge, and I am his son, his heir. The company you work for, this resort, it's all laundry." The clean face. The word hung in the air. Punge asterisk. Syndicate. Her mind reeled, connecting the whispers, the midnight calls in Mandarin, the dangerous men in the trees. It was all true. "You're a criminal," she whispered, the word tasting like ash. "I'm a realist." He took another step, close enough now that she could see the fatigue etched around his eyes, the pain he was suppressing. "And you are the first person in years who hasn't looked at me like I'm either a trophy to win or a loaded gun to fear. You looked at me like a man. A frustrating, arrogant man, but a man, not an heir, not a monster, just a man." His confession disarmed her more than the weapon on the table. The anger bled out, replaced by a profound, terrifying ache. "That man wrote me a beautiful letter." "That man," he said, his gaze intense, "is also this man, the one who protects what's his, who deals in threats and keeps promises, who wants you so much it's a physical pain right here." He tapped his chest over his heart. "Even though it's the worst possible idea, even though you should run. You want me to be afraid of you." "I want you to be safe from me," he corrected, raw honesty cracking his voice. "But I'm selfish. I see you in that robe, looking at me not with fear but with whatever that is in your eyes right now, and I don't want to let you go." She stared at him, at the vulnerability and the danger warring in his expression. The cut on his back, the gun, the confession, they should have sent her running. Instead, they painted a complete picture for the first time. A terrible, compelling one. "You need to clean that properly," she said finally, her voice hoarse. "The cut. It needs antiseptic, not whatever is in that mystery bottle." A beat of stunned silence. Then the ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Are you offering to play nurse, MD Kang?" I'm offering not to let you get an infection and die in our shared suite. The paperwork would be a nightmare. She turned and walked toward the bathroom. Come on, I have a proper first aid kit. The public Jjimjilbang, more like a steam room, was nearly deserted at midnight, a hazy cathedral of heat and quiet. Chanel, wrapped in the standard issue shorts and t-shirt, had come to sweat out the confusion, to think in the anonymous, communal dark. She lay on the heated jade floor of the salt room, eyes closed, trying to purge the image of the gun, the feel of his skin under her fingertips as she'd carefully dressed his wound. The door slid open with a whisper. A man's silhouette filled the doorway, then entered. Even in the dim, misty light, she knew his shape instantly. The breadth of his shoulders, the way he carried himself. Toji. He wore identical shorts and a shirt, his hair damp. He saw her and froze. For a long second, they just stared at each other through the swirling salt steam. You have got to be kidding me, he hissed under his breath, low and sharp. My thoughts exactly, she hissed back, sitting up. Go away. I was here first, he muttered, though he made no move to leave. You were not. I've been here 20 minutes. Then you've had your turn. Leave. No, you leave. They glared at each other across the small, hot room. The door slid shut behind him, trapping them in the intimate, misty space. Leaving would mean walking past the other, an admission of defeat. Neither moved. Finally, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the world, he walked over and sank onto the floor a few feet away from her, his back against the warm wall. The silence stretched, thick with everything unsaid. How's the shoulder? She asked, the words clipped. Sore, thanks to your less than gentle nursing. You're welcome. Next time try not to get shot. It was a knife, he corrected quietly. And I didn't get it, I intercepted it. There's a difference. She looked at him then. In the simple clothes, without the armor of his suits, the dark circles under his eyes were more pronounced. He looked younger and infinitely more tired. For who? He met her gaze. Does it matter? It might. He looked away into the mist. For someone who didn't need to see that world, someone who was just in the wrong place. He closed his eyes. It's what we do. We protect our territory, our people. Is that what I am? The question slipped out, stark and naked. Am I your territory now, because you put your jacket on me? His eyes snapped open. They burned in the dim light. Is that what you want to be? She didn't answer. She couldn't. I don't know what you are, Chanel, he said, his voice low and rough. A complication, a distraction, a glimpse of a different life. All I know is that since you walked into this resort, the only clear thought I've had is of you. She drew her knees up to her chest. You shouldn't say things like that. Why? Because they're true. Because they make this harder. Good, he said, a trace of his old arrogance returning. It should be hard. Anything worth having usually is. You're quoting self-help posters now. I'm stating a fact from a life that has never given me anything easily. Not respect. Not power. Certainly not, he trailed off, his jaw working. Not what? He turned his head, his gaze searing into her. Not the undivided attention of a woman who could level me with a look. Who has a past, a life, a strength that has nothing to do with me. Who doesn't need me. That is a foreign country, and I want to map every inch of it. The heat in the room was no longer just from the salt rocks. It was in her blood, in the space between their bodies. She was drowning in his words, in the raw, unfiltered want in his eyes. You're impossible, she whispered. And you're stubborn, he countered. You're sitting here, in a sweat room with a man you just found out is a criminal, arguing with me instead of running for the hills. What does that say about you? It says I'm an excellent judge of character, who is currently off her game. He let out a short, surprised laugh. The sound was beautiful in the quiet room. Fair. They lapsed into silence again, but it was different now. The tension had softened, woven through with a thread of understanding, of shared, impossible humor in the midst of the madness. Tell me something real, he said after a while, his voice quiet. Not about work, something from before, something that makes you you. She was quiet for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Every Sunday, my grandmother made gumbo, the whole day. The roux had to be the color of a copper penny. She'd let me stir. She said the rhythm was a prayer. She swallowed. I haven't made it since she died. I'm afraid I'll get the color wrong. He listened, utterly still. It was the most personal thing she'd ever told him, more personal than the divorce. The color of a copper penny, he repeated softly, as if committing it to memory. I'd like to see that someday. The simple statement, the quiet assumption of a future, shattered her. It was more romantic than any letter. The door slid open, and an elderly couple shuffled in, breaking the spell. Toji pushed himself to his feet in one fluid motion. He looked down at her, his expression unreadable once more. "It's late," he said, his voice back to its controlled, formal tone. But his eyes held the echo of everything they just shared. He turned and left without another word. Chanel sat in the swirling steam, the ghost of his laughter and the promise in his words clinging to her skin more surely than the salt. The line was gone. She had stepped over it the moment she cleaned his wound. Now she was just waiting to see where she would land. The air between them had changed. It was no longer a wall, nor a charged game. It was a thin, fragile bridge suspended over a chasm, and they were walking its length with careful, measured steps. The shared silence in the suite, over a simple breakfast of fruit and coffee, was louder than any argument. He knows how I take my coffee. He knows about my grandmother's gumbo. He knows the shape of my mouth when I'm not looking. And I know he carries a gun and leads a double life. What does that make us? Chanel's mind was a riot. She watched his hands, graceful and sure as he poured more coffee. The same hands that had wielded a knife in the dark last night. They had been gentle when she dressed his wound. "The team hike is at 10, he said, not looking at her. "The path to the eastern ridge, it's peaceful." His voice was neutral, but the word peaceful felt like a plea or a promise. For a man like him, peace was clearly a commodity. "I'll be ready," she said. The forest was a cathedral of ancient pines and dappled sunlight. The junior team, led by an overly enthusiastic Myra, chattered ahead, their voices fading into the rustle of needles. Toji walked slightly behind Chanel, a silent, watchful presence. The normalcy of it, the crisp air, the scent of damp earth, was a bizarre contrast to the revelations of the night. This is a facade, she thought, her boots sinking into the soft path. This whole retreat, this company, him, a beautiful, legitimate front for something dark, and I'm walking right in the middle of it. She was so lost in her thoughts she didn't notice he'd stopped. She turned. He was 10 yards back, statue, still, staring into the dense thicket to the left of the path. His posture had gone from relaxed to coiled in a millisecond. The shift was terrifying. "Keep walking," he said, his voice low, a command that brooked no argument. "Catch up to the others, now." Before she could process the order, 2 men in dark, expensive outdoor gear emerged from the trees. They weren't hikers. Their faces were hard, their movements efficient. They bowed slightly to Toji. "Seancing, the older one said, his voice respectful but urgent. Toji didn't acknowledge Chanel. He stepped off the path, gesturing for the men to follow him into the deeper woods. In 3 strides, they were swallowed by the green gloom. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Seancing, teacher, boss, not VP Lee." The word confirmed everything. Run, go to the others, be smart. Her feet, however, were betraying her. They moved off the path, stepping as softly as she could on the fallen needles, following the direction they'd gone. She found a cluster of massive, moss-covered boulders and crouched behind them, her pulse roaring in her ears. She could hear them. Their voices were low, tense. "The shipment from Incheon was intercepted. The Jeonju crew. They're getting bold," one man said in rapid Korean. "How much was lost?" Toji's voice. Cold, analytical, no trace of the man from the sweat room. 20 million won. They left a message. A dragon's scale broken in half. A beat of silence so sharp Chanel could feel it. "They want a war," Toji stated, his voice dropping to something deadly quiet. "They think the old dragon is sleeping and the heir is a child playing CEO. What is your command, Seancing? My command, Toji said, each word like a chip of ice, is to find where they've stored my property. Then you burn their warehouse to the ground. Leave the broken scale in the ashes. No warnings, just fire. Understood. And Minho. Yes, Seonsingnim. The man who took the knife for the courier last night. See that his family wants for nothing. Permanently. It will be done. There was the sound of a brief bowed departure, then rustling as one man left. Chanel pressed her forehead against the cool, damp stone. 20 million won. Warehouses, fire, a man taking a knife for a courier. The abstract concept of syndicate crystallized into brutal, specific reality. This wasn't a drama. This was his life. She waited, frozen, until she heard the second man leave. She let out a shuddering breath and stood, her legs weak. She turned to creep back to the path and walked directly into Toji's chest. He hadn't left. He'd been waiting. His face was a mask of fury, his eyes black with it. What? He growled, the word vibrating with controlled rage. Do you think you're doing? The suite door slammed shut behind them, the sound final as a gunshot. Toji has returned to the room. The cheerful mountain light streaming through the windows felt like a mockery. You followed me. He didn't shout. The quiet intensity was worse. You told me to walk into a war zone, she shot back, her own fear morphing into anger. You order people to burn down buildings. You talk about shipments and knives and permanent arrangements for families. Who are you? You heard enough to answer that question yourself. He ripped off his jacket, throwing it onto the couch. I told you last night. I showed you. Did you think it was a metaphor, Chanel? A sexy, dangerous fantasy? I thought it was complicated. I didn't think it was corporate arson and threats. It's not corporate, he roared, finally losing the tight leash on his control. He took a step toward her and she instinctively stepped back. The flinch didn't escape him. A muscle ticked in his jaw. He stopped, running a hand through his hair in a rare gesture of pure frustration. It's not a boardroom, it's territory, it's loyalty, it's a language you don't speak. Then translate it for me, she shouted, tears of frustration springing to her eyes. Because the man who wrote me that letter is in there somewhere, and I just watched him get swallowed whole by the dragon's air. So which one is real, the poet or the pyromaniac? He stared at her, his chest heaving. The anger seemed to drain out of him, replaced by a profound, weary bleakness. They're the same person, he said, his voice hollow. The poet sees the copper penny rue. The pyromaniac protects the people who make it. In my world, beauty needs a fortress. Softness requires sharp edges. You can't have one without the other. He's justifying it, her mind screamed. He's weaving a philosophy around brutality. But another, traitorous part whispered. He took a knife for a stranger. He provides for a man's family. Where is the line between monster and protector? Your father, the chairman. He's not just a businessman, is he? Her voice was small. Toji let out a sharp, humorless laugh. My father is the dragon, the jade dragon. I am the heir. The company you work for, this resort, the charity galas, the stock portfolio, it's all a front. The clean, legitimate face we show to the sun. The real business happens in the shadows. And that business, he said, finally meeting her eyes, is what pays for the sun. The final piece clicked into place. The vast, unexplained wealth. The deference that bordered on fear. The impossible authority in one so young. It wasn't just nepotism, it was succession. You're a criminal, she whispered, the word definitive now, a verdict. He didn't flinch. And you are the first person in years who hasn't looked at me with either greed or terror. He echoed his words from the night before, but now they sounded like an epitaph. You looked at me like a man, a flawed, infuriating man. You argued with me in a sweat room. You, he shook his head, a lost look crossing his features. It doesn't matter now. It matters to me, the cry was torn from her. It matters that I felt, she couldn't say it, that I felt seen, that I felt alive. What? He pressed, a desperate hope flaring in his eyes for a second. What did you feel, Chanel? Tell me, before you walk out that door and never look back. Tell me what the criminal made you feel. She hugged her arms around herself, a shield against him, against her own heart. He made me feel real, she admitted, the truth costing her everything. And now he's making me feel like a fool. The hope in his eyes died. He nodded slowly, accepting the blow. Then I am the fool, he said quietly, for thinking, even for a second, that a world of shadows could hold something as bright as you. He turned and walked to the window, presenting her with his back, the proud, wounded line of his shoulders, the bandage she'd placed over the cut he'd gotten playing protector. He was a mosaic of contradictions, and she had no idea how to piece him together. Just then, the door to the suite clicked open. It wasn't locked. Myra stood there, her keycard in hand, her face pale, her eyes wide as saucers. She'd clearly been listening. For how long? For one eternal second, the three of them stood frozen. Chanel in the center of the room, shattered, Toji at the window, a king in his ruined castle, and Myra in the doorway, a witness to the throne's collapse. Myra's eyes darted from Toji's rigid back to Chanel's tear-streaked face. The fear on her face was instantly replaced by a vicious, gleaming understanding. Without a word, Myra stepped back and pulled the door shut with a soft, definitive click. The sound seemed to wake Toji from his trance. He didn't turn around. She heard, he stated flatly. The fragile bridge between them didn't just collapse. It was incinerated. The private truth was now public ammunition. Chanel's professional life, her reputation, her safety, it was all unspooling because she'd followed a criminal into the woods and learned his name. She looked at the man by the window, this heir to a kingdom of darkness who had shown her glimpses of light. The poet and the pyromaniac, and she knew, with a sickening certainty, that the fallout would burn them both. A hand, firm and warm, closed around her shoulder, shaking gently. Chanel, wake up. She swam up from a deep, troubled sleep. Toji was leaning over her bed, already dressed in hiking gear, his face serious in the gray pre-dawn light. The digital clock read 5:07 a.m. What? Her voice was thick with sleep. Get dressed, warm layers, hiking boots now. She pushed herself up on her elbows, the silk robe slipping from her shoulders. Where are we going? What's happening? Nothing's happening. We're going for a hike. A hike at 5 a.m. without the team. Yes. She fell back against the pillows, pulling the duvet up. No, I'm sleeping. Your territorial disputes can wait until a reasonable hour. He didn't smile. He straightened up, looking down at her. In the dim light, he was all stark lines and command. Get up, Chanel, I'm not asking. And I'm not your soldier to order around, she mumbled into the pillow, though her heart had begun to beat faster. No, he agreed, his voice low. You're my managing director, and right now I am your boss. Get up. The words were a bucket of ice water. The intimacy of the sweat room, the shared secret, it was being forcibly shelved. This was hierarchy. This was the VP. Her mind flashed to Myra's terrified, knowing face in the doorway. Was this a removal? A quiet trip into the woods to ensure her silence? A cold fear slithered down her spine. She looked at him, searching for a hint of the poet, the man who'd catalogued her expressions. He was gone. Only the air remained. Slowly, she swung her legs out of bed. Fine. Dressed in silence, she followed him. He moved with a predator's quiet through the slumbering lodge, using a staff entrance that led directly into the tree line at the back of the property. The forest was a world of deep blues and whispered sounds, the air so cold it hurt her lungs. He set a punishing pace up a narrow, rocky trail she hadn't seen before. Her mind raced. Is this it? Is this where he deals with a liability? But he'd had a gun last night. He wouldn't need a hike, unless he wanted it to look like an accident. The thoughts were surreal, cinematic, and yet entirely plausible given what she now knew. After 20 minutes of steep incline, her lungs burning, she stopped, bracing her hands on her knees. I'm tired, she gasped. I need a minute. Toji, who seemed utterly unaffected, turned and looked back at her. We're almost to the flat section. I said I'm tired. He walked back down to her, stopping a foot away. Then climb on. She stared at him. What? My back. I'll carry you the rest of the way to the ridge. A laugh, brittle and sharp, escaped her. Absolutely not. I'm not a child. No, you're a stubborn woman who's about to hold us up. Get on. No. He sighed, a sound of pure exasperation. Then, in one swift, fluid motion, he bent, hooked an arm behind her knees and the other around her back, and lifted her clean off the ground. Hey, put me down. Toji, I swear to God. She pushed against his chest, but he was solid as granite. He simply adjusted his grip and started walking back up the path, her protests meaningless against his strength. You are infuriating, she seethed. You are slow, he replied, his voice steady, not even strained. This is more efficient. He carried her as if she weighed nothing. The world from this vantage point was disorienting. The scent of pine and cold earth was mixed with the clean, warm smell of his skin through his jacket. Her arms were trapped against his chest. After a minute of futile struggling, she went still, seething in silence. He navigated a particularly steep, rocky part of the trail, his boots finding purchase with unnerving ease. You know, he said conversationally, if I were actually the monster you're currently thinking I am, this would be a very convenient spot for an accident. A tragic slip. So sad. Her blood ran cold. Her arms, which had been held stiffly, instinctively tightened around his neck. She felt the rumble of his low laugh against her side. See, you do know how to hold on when you're scared. That wasn't funny, she whispered, her face buried in the shoulder of his jacket. It was a little funny. Your grip just tightened by about 50%. You can admit you feel safe here. I feel kidnapped. Semantics. He shifted her weight slightly, his hand splaying wider across her back. You fit perfectly, like you were designed to be right here. Don't, she said, but the fight had left her voice. The warmth of him was seeping through her layers. The steady rhythm of his stride was oddly soothing. It was a terrible, confusing comfort. Don't what? State the obvious. You've been holding on to me since the moment I draped my jacket over you at dinner. The letter just gave you an excuse to think about my mouth as much as I think about yours. Her cheeks flamed. You're insane. And you're a terrible liar. You love this. You love that I can just pick you up and take you where I want to go. That I see through every one of your professional walls. It terrifies you and thrills you in equal measure. What I love is not being manhandled by my delinquent boss. Delinquent. Ouch, I prefer non-traditional executive. You prefer criminal heir. A title is a title. He hoisted her a little higher, his voice dipping, turning serious. You're not a liability, Chanel, and this isn't a trip to the woods to silence you. If it were, you'd already be silent. Then what is it? A ceasefire. One morning without the company, without the junior assassins, without the weight of who my father is. Just the mountain, and us. The raw honesty disarmed her. She was quiet for a long moment, the only sound his footsteps and their breathing. You can't separate those things. The you that wants a ceasefire is the same you that orders warehouses burned. I know, he said, and the two words held a universe of regret. But this morning I'm trying. She relaxed infinitesimally against him. It was impossible not to. You're still carrying me like a caveman. You're still using my criminality as an excuse to hold me tight, he countered, a smirk in his voice. Admit it, you like my arms around you. I'm tolerating a transport method. You're nuzzling my jacket. She jerked her head up. I am not nuzzling. See, defensive, guilty conscience. She swatted his shoulder. You're impossible. And you're my favorite contradiction. He paused, his tone shifting again, softer. This thing between us, you feel it. It's not a boss-employee thing. It's not a fling. It's a mate thing. The word, so primal, so possessive, sent a shock through her. I am not your mate. I'm a 42-year-old divorced woman. You're a teenage warlord in a grown man's body. Age is a number, Chanel, and in every way that matters, I'm older than you. I've carried more. I've decided life and death more times than you've had hot meals. I am capable of protecting you, of providing for you, of driving you out of your mind. He turned his head, his lips close to her ear. And you are more than capable of handling me. You've been doing it since day one. She rolled her eyes, glad he couldn't see her face, which was burning. This is the most deranged pep talk I've ever received. It's not a pep talk. It's a fact. You're mine. You just haven't accepted the paperwork yet. Fed up, she squirmed. Put me down, now I'm walking. As you wish. He loosened his grip and let her slide down the front of his body. Her feet hit the path. The sudden separation made her feel unsteady, cold. She took 2 determined steps forward. Then she felt it, a skittering, tickling sensation crawling up her calf, under her hiking pants. She froze, a yelp tore from her throat. In a flash of pure panic, she jumped backwards, launching herself at Toji. Spider, big one, on me. He caught her easily, his arms closing around her again, a full-bodied laugh shaking his chest. Where? My leg, get it off. He smoothly swept a hand down her calf, brushing away the unseen offender. It's gone, just a daddy longlegs, not a threat. She was still clinging to him, her heart hammering. He made no move to put her down this time. He just held her, his laughter fatting into a deep, satisfied chuckle. He leaned his head close to hers. Welcome back to Daddy, he murmured, his voice rich with amusement and something darker, sweeter. She groaned, mortification mixing with the residual adrenaline. I hate you. I hate this forest. I hate spiders. MMHMM. He began walking again, still carrying her. You can let go now, you know. The 8-legged monster is vanquished. She didn't let go. Her arms stayed locked around his neck. After a minute, she muttered into his skin, If you tell anyone about this. My lips are sealed, he said, and she could hear the grin in his voice. But I'll remember it, forever. She said nothing, letting him carry her, the world passing by in a blur of green and gray. Her stubbornness had evaporated, replaced by a weary, warm acquiescence. He had won this round utterly. 10 minutes later, the trees thinned. He stepped into a small, hidden clearing. In the center, nestled against a sheer rock face, was a perfect, tiny log cabin. Smoke curled from its stone chimney. It looked centuries old and impeccably kept. He finally set her down on her feet, his hands resting on her shoulders to steady her. What is this place? She breathed. Mine, he said simply. No one else knows it's here, not the resort, not the company, not my father. He looked down at her, his earlier arrogance softened into something like vulnerability. Just me, and now you. He took her hand, his fingers lacing through hers with a certainty that brooked no argument, and led her toward the heavy wooden door. The secret world had just offered her its deepest secret, and she, against all judgment, was walking right in. Toji pushed the heavy oak door open, and Chanel stepped into another world. Oh my God, she breathed, the words leaving her in a stunned whisper. The cabin was not what she had expected. It was not a rustic hunter's shack. It was a sanctuary of profound, masculine luxury, a hidden gem carved into the mountain's embrace. The main room was dominated by a soaring ceiling of exposed, honey-colored pine beams. One entire wall was natural rock, glistening faintly with seepage, beside which a massive stone fireplace held a crackling blaze that painted everything in dancing gold light. The furnishings were minimalist but sumptuous. A deep, charcoal sectional sofa piled with sheepskin throws, a low ebony wood table, shelves lined not with books but with curated artifacts, a geode split open to reveal purple crystals, a sleek samurai helmet replica, a vintage bourbon decanter. What is this place? She finally managed to ask, turning in a slow circle. Mine, he said simply, closing the door and locking it with a solid, definitive thunk. The sound sealed them in. A secret. No one at the resort knows it exists. It's not on any property map. It can't be traced to the company or to my family. He walked past her, his boots silent on the wide plank walnut floors. He went to the rock wall and touched a panel. With a soft hum, hidden LED lights embedded in the beams above glowed to life, shifting the room's atmosphere from fire-lit mystery to a clearer, cooler intimacy. Come on, he said. I'll show you. He led her through an arched doorway into a kitchen that belonged in a Milanese loft, sleek black cabinets, a professional range, a waterfall island of polished concrete. I cook here, he said, as if it were a normal confession, when I need to think with my hands. Another door revealed a bedroom. It was almost Spartan. A king-sized platform bed on a raised dais, dressed in crisp white linens. A single, narrow window looking out onto a sheer cliff face and a sliver of sky. No art, no clutter. It felt like a monk's cell designed for a billionaire. The final door opened to a bathroom that made her gasp. It was carved into the mountain itself. The floor and walls were smooth, dark slate, but the centerpiece was a deep, sunken tub hewn directly from the bedrock, filled by a natural, steaming hot spring that trickled from a crevice in the stone. The air was thick with mineral-scented vapor. "The spring is why this spot was chosen, generations ago," he said, watching her face. Chanel's mind was reeling, trying to reconcile the man who ordered arson with the man who built this hidden haven. How did this start? Did you inherit this?" "In a way," he said, guiding her back to the main room. He gestured for her to sit on the sofa. She did, sinking into its impossible softness. He remained standing by the fire. "My grandfather built it as a bolt hole, a place no one could find. He was a pragmatic man. He understood the need for a place untouched by his business. My father never cared for it, too remote. I had it rebuilt, modernized, kept it secret. And the government, property lines, taxes." The practical, corporate part of her mind clawed for purchase. A faint, wry smile touched his lips. "You operate in a world of permits and paperwork, Chanel. I operate in a world of relationships and understandings. The right people are aware. The right people are compensated. It exists because I will it to exist." The sheer, quiet arrogance of the statement, the casual invocation of a power that bent bureaucracy, should have frightened her. Instead, in this secluded nest, it felt like a fact of nature, like the mountain outside. He walked to a control panel by the fireplace. With another touch, the overhead lights dimmed to a faint glow, leaving the fire and the new, soft lighting from under the shelves as the room's only illumination. The room became a cocoon of shadow and flame. "I've brought business associates here for discreet meetings," he said, his back to her. "I've hidden people here who needed to disappear for a while." He turned to face her, his expression unreadable in the low light. "But I have never, ever brought someone here just because I wanted to be with them, to be away from everything, with no other purpose." He took a few steps toward her, stopping just out of arm's reach. The firelight carved the planes of his face into stark relief. "I'm here to spend this time with my favorite person in the world." The words landed in the quiet room with the weight of a vow. There was no flirtation in his tone now, no teasing arrogance. It was a raw, terrifying sincerity. Her breath caught. "Toji." "It's you, Chanel. It's only ever been you since you walked into that boardroom and didn't simper or flatter. You just stood there, solid as this mountain, and commanded the room. You looked at me, and you saw a man, not a myth or a monster. You are the most real thing that has ever happened to me." He closed the final distance, crouching down in front of her so their eyes were level. He didn't touch her. He just held her gaze, his own dark eyes reflecting the fire, full of a need so profound it stole the air from her lungs. "In this room right now," he said, his voice a low, urgent rasp, "there is no Lee Corporation, no Jade Dragon, no MD, no VP. There's just a man who is completely, irrevocably captivated by a woman, and the woman who is too stubborn to admit she feels the same." The world outside, Myra's betrayal, the gun on the table, the burning warehouses, melted away in the heat of his confession. Here, in this secret heart of his secret world, he was offering her a version of himself she swore no one else had ever seen. The poet fully unmasked. She was mesmerized. The pull was gravitational. Her gaze dropped to his lips, the same lips that had written the letter, that had smiled cruelly and spoken softly. He saw the shift. He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. Their lips met. It was nothing like the first desperate kiss in the garden. This was slow, deep, a deliberate exploration, a claiming and a surrender. His hand came up to cradle her jaw, his thumb stroking her cheekbone. She tasted the faint, clean scent of the mountain air on him, and something inherently him, dark, rich, intoxicating. A low sound vibrated in his chest, a hum of pure satisfaction that she felt in her own. She kissed him back, her hands coming up to clutch the front of his shirt, pulling him closer. For a long, breathless moment, there was only the crackle of the fire and the soft, seeking sound of their kiss. Then a splinter of cold reality pierced the warmth. This is the dragon's lair. You are kissing a criminal in his hidden fortress. The thought was a splash of ice water. She broke the kiss, pulling back sharply. Her eyes flew open. She turned her face away from his, her chest heaving. I can't, she whispered, the words thick with conflicting desire. I'm not in the mood. The silence that followed was absolute. She could feel the intensity of his gaze on her profile, searching, weighing. The heat between them cooled into a tense, brittle void. Slowly, he stood up. He took a deliberate step back, putting space between them. The fire cast his tall shadow, long and twisting, against the rock wall. I apologize, he said, his voice formal, flat, stripped of all its previous warmth. It was the VP's voice again. I misread the moment. He turned and walked to the concrete island in the kitchen area, pulling a silver cigarette case and a lighter from a drawer. He lit a cigarette, the flare of the flame briefly illuminating his impassive face. He took a long drag, exhaling the smoke toward the high ceiling. You should bathe, he said, not looking at her. The hot spring. It will ease your muscles from the hike. Clean clothes are in the bedroom wardrobe. Choose anything. She stared at his back, the rejection hanging in the air, mingling with the smoke. Why? Where are we going after? He didn't answer. He simply took another drag, his gaze fixed on some point in the middle distance, lost in his own thoughts or plans. Chanel's shoulders slumped. The whiplash from searing romance to cold dismissal left her dizzy and aching. She pushed herself up from the sofa, the luxurious softness now feeling like a trap. She shot a frustrated glance at his unyielding back. Men, she thought, the old, familiar exasperation a thin shield for her hurt. Criminal masterminds are apparently just as emotionally constipated as the rest of them. With a quiet, resigned sigh, she turned and walked toward the steamy, echoing bathroom, leaving him alone with his cigarette and his secrets. Toji came out of the cabin's small bathroom, a plain white towel slung low around his hips, another scrubbing through his damp hair. Morning light streamed through the single window, catching the steam that followed him. Chanel, who had been staring into the crackling fire, looked up and froze. She'd seen him without a shirt before, but briefly in crisis, focused on a wound. This was different. This was domestic, casual, and it revealed a map on his skin she hadn't known existed. Across the hard plane of his left pectoral, a sleek black and gray dragon coiled, its tail snaking over his shoulder blade, its head lowered near his heart, not roaring but watchful. Its scales were intricately detailed. Along his right ribs, in elegant, precise Hangul, ran a vertical line of text. On his left forearm, a more abstract, geometric pattern intertwined with what looked like old, faded tally marks. He finished with his hair and dropped the towel on a chair, seemingly oblivious to her stare, as he walked to a worn duffel bag in the corner. You have tattoos, she said, her voice quiet in the cabin's stillness. He didn't look up, rummaging for clothes. Observant. I didn't see them before. They don't glow in the dark. He pulled out a simple black t-shirt. She stood up from the hearth and walked closer, drawn despite herself. The dragon was magnificent, terrifying. The script was beautiful. Up close, she could see the tally marks were notches, some deeper than others. A cold realization settled in her stomach. The dragon, that's the jade dragon, isn't it? Your family. He pulled the shirt over his head, the fabric swallowing the symbol of his legacy. It's a dragon. And the writing, on your ribs. He finally looked at her, his face unreadable. It says, the wind does not break a mountain that bows. That's poetic. It's advice. He stepped into a pair of dark jeans. She pointed to his forearm, her finger hovering near the notches. And these. His eyes followed her gesture. A shadow passed over his face. A reminder. Of what? Of cost. He zipped his jeans, his movements deliberate. Everyone is a promise kept, or a debt collected. The casual, chilling answer stole her breath. He said it the way another man might say grocery list. She hugged herself. How many are there? Enough. He sat on a rough-hewn bench to pull on his boots. You ask a lot of questions for someone who was complaining about a spider 2 hours ago. I'm trying to understand the man who carried me here. I told you, the man who carried you here is the same man with the tattoos. You don't get to parse me into pieces you like and pieces you don't. It's a package deal. He stood up, fully dressed, the dangerous air once more, the intimate morning vulnerability sealed away under cotton and denim. Your turn, the bathroom's free. She felt dismissed. The questions boiled inside her, but his wall was up. She grabbed her own small pack and retreated to the tiny bathroom to change out of her hiking clothes. When she emerged, she was dressed in comfortable leggings, a thick, cozy hoodie, and her boots. Practical, defensive. Toji, who was placing another log on the fire, glanced over. A slow, incredulous smile spread across his face. It wasn't the warm smile from the trail. This was pure, arrogant amusement. What, he said, straightening up, is that? She looked down at herself. Clothes, for a walk back, it's cold. He burst out laughing, a rich, genuine sound that echoed in the small space. A walk? Who said anything about a walk? We're in a cabin in the woods. The logical next step is a walk. Or, preferably, a hike back to the resort so I can file a formal complaint about my kidnapping. The logical next step, he said, walking toward her, his eyes glittering, is that we're going to a club. She blinked. A club in the woods. In the city, my city, I have business, and you're coming with me. I am not going to a club with you. My team is back at the resort. Myra probably has the police looking for me by now. As if on cue, her phone, buried in her hoodie pocket, began to buzz. Then it rang, the tinny sound shockingly loud. She pulled it out. Myra. The screen flashed. It stopped, then immediately started again. Sarah. Toji watched the display, his expression cooling. Turn it off. I can't just turn it off. They'll think something happened. Something did happen. You left with me, they know that. Myra definitely knows more. Let them think what they want. He held out his hand. Give it to me or turn it off. No, I need to tell them I'm all right. Are you, he asked, his head tilting. Are you all right, Chanel? Because you're in a secret cabin with a criminal, hiding from your colleagues, and you just spent the morning wrapped around me so tight I could feel your heartbeat in my teeth. Does that sound like a woman who wants to call and say she? All right. The phone rang again. CHEWON. They're worried, she insisted, but her thumb hovered over the ignore button. They're curious. There's a difference. Worry is quiet. This, he nodded at the buzzing device, is a feeding frenzy. You call them now and you become the story. The American MD who ran off with the VP. The scandal. The gossip. Is that what you want, to be their entertainment? She hated that he was right. The calls weren't about her safety, they were about the drama. Myra's face, greedy with secret knowledge, flashed in her mind. What do you suggest I do? She whispered, the phone falling silent, then immediately starting to buzz again. Disappear, he said simply. For one night, with me, let them choke on their speculation. Tomorrow you walk back in head high and give them nothing. You're the MD, act like it. And just go to club. What about bears? Or your rival warehouse burners? He snorted. The bears are more scared of you, and my rival warehouse burners don't frequent the places I'm taking you. Too much chrome hurts their eyes. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. Turn it off, be unreachable. For once in your perfectly managed life, be a mystery instead of a memo. Her thumb trembled. The phone buzzed angrily in her hand, a tether to the world of rules and repercussions. Toji's world was of shadows and fire, but it was also of whispered truths in sweat rooms and secret cabins. It was terrifying. It was real. She pressed the side button and held it. The screen went dark. The silence that followed was absolute and profound. A slow, triumphant smile touched Toji's lips. Good. Don't look so smug. I still look like I'm about to go chop firewood. We are not going to a club. Yes, he said, taking her hand. We are, come on. He led her across the main room of the cabin to what appeared to be a solid wall of shelves filled with old books, fishing tackle, and canned goods. He reached behind a large, dusty volume on Korean forestry, and she heard a soft click. A section of the shelving, about 3 feet wide, swung inward silently. Chanel gasped. "Close your eyes," he said. "Why?" "Just do it." She squeezed her eyes shut. She heard him tap a code on a keypad, a series of precise melodic beeps. A heavier hydraulic whoosh followed, and the air changed, becoming cooler, carrying a faint scent of cedar and ozone. "Okay," he said. "Look." She opened her eyes. They were standing in a room that belonged in a luxury boutique, not a rustic cabin. Soft, recessed lighting illuminated racks of clothing. Men's suits, impeccable and dark, lined one wall. The other wall. The other wall held dresses. Sleek sheaths, a bold crimson cocktail number, a dress made entirely of black sequins that looked like a night sky, a figure-hunting gown of emerald green silk, all in her size. She knew it without checking. But that wasn't what made her heart stop. On a small, elegant table in the center of the room, framed in silver, was a photograph. It was of her. From the company website, her professional headshot, but someone had printed it on rich matte paper. Leaning against the frame was a small card. In his same, slashing script, it read, "For when you're ready to be worshipped." Next to it was another, a candid shot, taken from a distance, of her laughing at a company picnic months ago, her head thrown back. That card read, "For the sound I can't get out of my head." Tacked to a mood board were more, her leaving the office building focused. Her sipping coffee at her desk, pensive. Notes accompanied each one. "My North Star, the only real thing in the room, mine." It was a shrine. A beautiful, terrifying, meticulously curated shrine. He had been watching, planning, wanting, not for days, but for months. Her hands flew to her mouth. She took a stumbling step back, her wide eyes scanning the room. The clothes, the photos, the devastatingly intimate proof of his obsession. She turned to look at him, her breath coming in short, sharp pants. He was leaning against the doorframe, watching her reaction, his expression a complex mix of defiance, hope, and naked vulnerability. Her voice, when it finally came, was a disbelieving, breathless shriek. "What?"